It's time for your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene.
Do you want to do the intro this week, Jolene?
Whatever.
You sure?
Ooh, sure, Jason. I'd love to have a chance to do the intro.
I think you're just being passive aggressive.
I'll be directly fucking aggressive.
Oh, boy.
Welcome to your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast. He's Jason. I'm Jolene.
And we're going to be talking passive aggressive bullshit this week.
Believe it or not, I'm actually really good at it.
Oh, I'm sure.
Tried to get really good at not being good at it.
It's. I think we're all good at being passive aggressive is the thing. Because I think it's prevalent, even to the fact that it was requested that we talk about this from a listener, which I think is cool.
Yes, actually, one of my clients and listeners said, yeah, you got to do an episode on this. So I was just like, Jason, whatever. They want us to talk about this.
So
okay.
I guess we shall. What is passive aggressive then by definition?
I have a couple of definitions here on the old Google of behavior. It's characterized by indirect resistance to the demands of others and avoidance of direct confrontation. You guys want to hear this example? Mm-hmm. The couple have a passive-aggressive exchange about what to order for dinner.
How do you have a passive-aggressive exchange about dinner?
Yes. So then when I go into lower in my little Google search here, it's like, for example, someone who engages in passive-aggressive behavior might appear to agree, perhaps even enthusiastically, with another person's request. Rather than complying with the request, however, he or she might express anger or resentment by failing to follow through with missed deadlines or things like that. Ooh. So that's how that rolls out. Like, oh, sure. Yeah, I will take on the, the bringing of cakes to the office every fucking birthday that people have. And then all of a sudden they just start like dropping the ball. Like, oh, I'll show you. You want to drop that on me? Fine. I'll just not do it.
Yeah. Teach you a lesson.
I find that passive aggressive behavior also is like one of the biggest forms of control. So people, it's interesting. By not doing something, you actually have 10 times more control in things. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples.
Please do.
Signing a child's passport. You know how much control you have by not fucking doing that?
Boatload. Well, it's like the signing of the divorce papers.
There you go.
Right?
These are ways to maintain control. So this comes up in my office all the time because a lot of times we think of people having control by doing things, but withholding can be a huge form of control. And that can be emotion, it can be action, it can be lots of different things, right? Mm-hmm. Not receiving pay, all different sorts of things, right? Like withholding a response can be a form of control. How many people ghost when they don't like what someone's done?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that would kind of be the piece. I think when we think of passive aggressive behavior, we think of more action focused things. It's the comments under one's breath. It is the look on someone's face. It's the follow through with something, even though the resentment is the biggest one. This is the biggest one, is that it is bred from a place of resentment and self-abandonment, because resentment is a source of self-abandonment, right? So those would be the places. And I think we are forced into places in our life where we have to be passive aggressive in a sense, because we're like, oh, I just had to grin and bear it. I just had to make it through that family dinner. I had to this, I had to that. And it's like, how do you really acknowledge that and kind of like coddle it in a sense to say this is time limited. It doesn't need to carry through. This is not a primary communication mechanism. Yeah. I think that's the key, is some people use it as a primary communication mechanism.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I talk a lot about this in terms of generational stuff. I think that the generation before, like say my mom's generation, your mom's generation, I often talk about the dynamic of how women did not have emotional space or ability in their lives to work through a lot of the things we have validation around now. Like I can flip through social media and know I'm not the only person experiencing the things I'm experiencing. Our moms back then didn't. They were isolated, alone. Nobody talked about a lot of this stuff unless you had a lady that had coffee next door or whatever, right? So there was a buildup of like living in the patriarch, feminist movements coming in saying you're supposed to be doing all these things, you're in charge of all of this stuff. Just an example from a female perspective. And there's a lot of resentment that builds in there. And there's like this martyring complex of how much are we doing for others? That just is huge breeding ground for passive aggressive behavior, because essentially everyone's screaming inside but can't scream at anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it just becomes this like every behavior is resentment filled.
We see that
instead of genuine and authentic in its presentation.
And we're seeing that a lot right now. I'd say politically, and then like within the current feminist movement towards men, and then now you're seeing that within the men's movement towards women,
and that's
then
the thing,
you know
right?
what I mean. Like,
so where does that manifest with men? Like, where can you see men being more passive aggressive in terms of things?
Well, I guess, and I like it's weird. I don't have a lot of contact that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But from what I just see around me, is it sounds like one way that men are being passive aggressive is they're just not dating anymore.
It's
It
dating
seems to be
or
a big
participating.
thing.
I
They're
think
not
there's a
participating
massive
in-
avoidance
Yeah.
and there's a lack of participation, which means it's more avoidance. I would say it's more on the passive side, and it is the I am not happy wife, happy life. Fine, you do it all. And there are so many marriages and partnerships where that is what's happening is and they appear to let the partner make all the decisions and do all the things, but it is through a lack of participation.
They're not turning up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lack of participation. So I would say that's one of the most dominant ways that males in the complaints in my office, in a sense, have been showing up in ways to say, fine, this is what our resistance looks like. Because when you know, like as a man who is participating in his career and his family and stuff, I always love this. Like if he was into you, he would do it.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like if he's into the work, he'll do it. If he's into you, he will do it. He will show up whether he likes the task or not, because it's not about the task. It's about his integrity as a man and showing up in the things that matter to him.
Yeah.
So if they are not doing it, it don't matter.
Yeah. They don't care.
It doesn't matter. And that becomes their protective mechanism, but it becomes a simplicity of like, we don't do what we don't care about. And if they don't care about it, then start looking at that, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it's a dead end street and that they won't care about it to some degree, but that would be the repair point. That's where the hole in the ship is.
Yeah.
Right?
So you got to work on that.
Yeah. And like, honestly, sometimes I'll often tell people like, if I'm sure there's a country song like
There's a country song for everything,
right? Yeah. and it's something like if he wanted to, he would. That's it.
Yeah.
Like it is that simple.
Yeah, and I think it probably applies both ways for both genders or in any situation, right?
Yeah.
So like you're seeing a trend right now more among Gen Z or whatever they're called about kind of the quiet quitting,
Yes.
right? They're just
That is the most passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Speak up for yourself. Allow yourself to say what's working, not working, and move on. What is this quiet? Yeah.
That's a huge one. And even, I guess, the point where they will not like refusing to do any extra work than what you're paid for. That's becoming a big thing too. Because I think it's, and I get it. You're hired for a job, but if your boss comes up and asks you to do a little bit extra, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But if they keep putting that on you, it's like, look, like I was hired. You just say, I was hired to do this, and you asked me to do this like every week. Like, what's going on here? Just say it. And if they want to turn into they're going to fire you, then maybe you shouldn't be working at that job anyways because they don't respect you.
Or maybe there's your cynicism, Jason. Or you have opportunity to align and be like, yeah, perfect. Let's promote you to this, or let's move this, or you're right. Do I need someone else to do that task? Those are also potential ways that situation could be resolved.
Right.
My fucking daughter did that to me this morning. She wanted me to order these little trinket things off of Amazon. And last night she was kind of not demonstrating the greatest behavior. And I am giving conditional reward at this point. Yes, you guys. Okay. So I'm like, you know what? Give me a couple of good bedtimes. Give me a morning where I'm not dropping you off late because you don't like the way your hair looks. All these things. Like, yeah, you know what? I think that's very reasonable. I would totally order them up for you. Let's have a couple of good days and work towards that. Right. She wakes up this morning. Hey, Mom, this is after a 10 o'clock bedtime case. She's 8 and they push it and push it and push it. So she's like, hey, Mom, did you order those things? And I was like, I haven't yet, but I'm really excited to later today. That was it.
Oh,
that was it. She
boy.
starts whining. She's doing her dance. And I was like, well, now I'm definitely putting it on pause and maybe we can start over again. And here's some examples. I said, really, you can just start right now and be like, hey, Mom, okay, perfect. Let me show you. Let me show you that you can order those up today.
Yeah.
But she would not. She was not committed to that. She is my cynical little child. But then she negotiated. And I have my kids are afraid to ask. And I'm like, give me a better idea. Because right now I am also cooking breakfast, dressing your other sibling, and getting myself ready. So like, I'm not looking at all the options right now. And she says, well, you could order them in advance. And because she's worried they're going to take too long to get here. I get that. Delayed gratification is hard for this generation.
It is very hard.
So I said, okay, I got that. She goes, you could order them and then I could earn them. And I was like, that's a valid option. You're right. That is something that I could potentially do. That's a good idea. And I walked out. She did not think I'd say yes or consider it or whatever, but that's the thing. You could get a response that's not always the no. I think as kids, we get no's all the time. So when I asked you last session, last episode. Right? He gets these ones for free, guys. When I asked you last episode, where it started early, I look at all the places my kids are like, adults never keep their word. And I even had one of them they were like, yeah, our teacher said that when adults say maybe, it's almost always a no. And I said, well, here's the thing. I don't want to say no because I don't think so. And I definitely don't want to say yes because you guys will accuse me of breaking a promise or my word. So I say I will consider it or we'll have to see. And that is the worst answer you guys want. I get it. But I am not giving you false word.
I do the same thing with Griffin.
Yeah. And I said, I also don't want to shut it down because I don't know if it's a no.
Yeah. You don't, and that's what I explained to him too. It's like, Dad, can we do this? I said, well, maybe because I've got X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I know you've got this, but if we can fit it in, we'll make it work.
This becomes the action plan. Yeah.
Right.
It's a really hard thing because they don't have frontal lobes. They don't have, Griffin's getting his, right? But now his blood distribution's going elsewhere too, right?
It is.
But yeah, mine really don't have the frontal lobe capacity to sequence all of that. So it is an immediate gratification world for them right now in terms of the world we live in, plus the way their brains are wired. So those are hard things. It's almost better if I just say no and shut it down. But I don't want to be the no parent all the time because I'm the everything parent for all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So it's that juggling act.
Yeah, funny. So if you go and think about, where you were modeled passive-aggressive behavior in life, right? You can think of some of the key people in your life that probably were stuck in places like that. I can think in workplaces where it's like a stalemate, almost like a checkmate position of I just cannot move you. You were so committed to staying here. Yeah.
Oh, I've had that with a buddy of mine who, when we were doing the film podcast, he'd want to write articles. So I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Or I'd be like, so he'd do that and it'd be fine for a while. And then they would stop, which is fine. But then I would ask look, I've got to go away for a few days. Can you take over and just post some stuff? And he'd be like, yeah, absolutely. And then I'd check and none of it would get done. And I'd be like, you motherfucker. You know what I mean?
And it's curious. So that's very cynical on your end. And then you're like, is that passive aggressive behavior or is there seriously a block?
Well, that would be the question. Right?
And did you ever have the conversation hey, I thought you were going to post stuff. Did something come up?
And I would. I got busy or something or I forgot or there was always some excuse. But I'd also, just knowing this person, know he wasn't doing anything else at the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And the question is then, how much are each of us committed to this?
Yeah, exactly. Right? And if you're not, just say no.
Yeah.
That's what I sort of always say. Look, if you don't want to or it's not your thing, just tell me no. It's okay. It doesn't matter.
I think some people, I love that you highlighted that because I think that happens a lot and there's broken promises because the person never intended to say yes.
Yeah.
They never intended to do it, but they will say yes to avoid the conflict in that moment.
Yeah.
And the discomfort. They would way rather fall short. And then this creates a buttload of problems in relationships. If you have any kind of I'm a failure cognition, it will reinforce that to the point that you actually shut it down and you just accept the fact that you're a failure so it doesn't ting that little spot anymore.
Yeah, so you don't feel that hurt.
Yeah. And you're just no, I don't do it and I can't do it and I'm not going to do it. And it becomes a protective mechanism to have that negative belief I'm a failure.
Yeah.
isn't that fucked up?
It's just fucked up.
Or I'm unreliable.
Yeah,
right?
or I'm unreliable. But then and it's like it's self-perpetuating that. So it becomes your identity.
Yeah.
Which to me is just so
and that's where like self-depreciating behavior and like comical stuff, it becomes that. It takes that negative cognition and it turns it into one that you've completely accepted, and it's a different place of self-acceptance. It's not, it's to protect yourself from the cognitive dissonance that creates for you. It's wild. It's wild, right? So when we look at passive aggressive behavior, again, I'm going to bring you back into your body, Jason. Okay. I want you to notice your own passive aggressive behavior.
Okay.
What happens in your body? How would you know that you are in a mental state of that?
It's weird. It's not like the cynicism.
That's a huge block.
Yeah. It's a huge block. It's more, it's like a tired feeling. It's like a tired feeling more than anything else.
It's heavy and it's a tired feeling. Yeah. For me, it's this almost like if you got gut punched.
Okay.
Right? If someone came at you and you just kind of retracted a bit, that's what that's like for me. And there then becomes my gut's just like, ugh. Just like there's a softball in it. It's almost like, and then you also have to like hold your core in a sense, because sometimes we have to receive or work through some of the things in life that put us in that place. Yeah. Right. So I also think there's I'm going to get gut punched, but I'm going to stay on the ice. Yeah. Right. In that kind of aspect. So for me, that's what that is. But then, that I think is kind of the tolerance of it. But then when the aggressive part comes in, you can feel like my face will often probably get red. Like I said, we all have passive aggressive tendencies. Yep. I was a pro at it in certain areas of my life, usually where I was most unaligned and miserable. I had passive aggressive everywhere and then it just became aggressive. It will usually evolve and there's no fucking passiveness in there anymore. And again, it's all about self-abandonment, not having the conversations, not leaving the situations, not doing what you have control over doing. And really accepting that, like, if someone else isn't going to change, you have to change how you exist there. Yeah. And you either fully accept it and stay, or you change it. Yeah. You change it. That's really the points in whatever scenario it comes from, right? Whether you're sitting in a restaurant getting shitty service, or you're in a relationship getting shitty service, whatever, or your job, right? It's the same biz. So I would say for me, it comes out in some of those ways. And then it's the aftermath of the behavior. It feels yucky.
It does. It feels like when I've done it, I feel like I've let myself down by doing it, because I'm usually pretty decisive, and I'm usually not afraid to say something, like, or stick up for myself or just be honest with people. So when I do it, I get very disappointed. And then I felt like I've taken a step backwards, even though that's not the case, but that's how it feels, right?
Yeah, it feels gross. And that's when you start to, I think, get some awareness of that. Like, why does this feel so yucky? Because it's not genuine. It's not authentic. This is why people become cynical, right? Yeah. Is like, okay, well, you said you were okay bringing all that stuff. Why didn't you just tell me no? Yeah. So now whenever someone says they're fine with it, I'm like double checking their intentions.
Like, are you sure?
Are you sure? And this is how that plays out in our relationships, our understanding of the world. And that's how these concepts will like interact with each other, right?
Well, that's why I thought it was almost good to have the cynicism talk and the passive aggressive talk back to back.
So even think about, growing up with maybe a parent who was more passive aggressive or things like that, you will start double checking your reality. Like, my kids will ask me sometimes, like, why are you talking like that? If I like try to change my tone, I said, because I'm tired of you guys bickering and arguing. I'm just trying to be more positive right now. Yeah. And they were like, it's not because you're mad, because there's times that I have given the sarcastic tone, and it's actually been me scolding them. Yeah. So they had to double check that, because they're like, I don't know which one this is. Is this authentic? They're young and they're picking up on all those social cues, right? And the only thing I can do, I can't repair the past. I can just tell them in that moment, no, I am not mad right now, but I'm also not giving any weight or attention to you guys bickering right now. Like, let's move on. Yeah. Right? Like, even one of my kids yesterday, I gave a very neutral response to something, and she was like, are you mad at me, Mom? And I'm just trying to give way more neutral responses these days, because sometimes they're so emotionally charged. It just creates this whole flavor in the house. So I'm just trying to be as neutral as possible, which is not me. If anyone knows me and I'm giving a neutral response, something's fucking up. Yeah. So my kids pick up on that right away. And I said, no, I'm just trying to not be impacted by any of this. Like, I don't want you guys to ripple the waters. I just Carry on.
Yeah.
These are non-events.
Yeah.
Right?
We're not doing this.
Oh my God. It's a fucking dried up felt. Let it go.
Exactly.
Here's the garbage can. Right? Yeah. So those are also examples of some of that stuff. Yeah. How do we feel? Okay, now I want you to notice when people have been passive aggressive in your life and look at times like before you were aware of this versus now. Okay. Now I imagine we would be way more resistant. The spidey senses would go up. Before, we might fawn to it. We might actually lean into it and be like, okay, well, what can I do to make this person stop being in this state?
For sure. Always try to be, the helping person, trying to get the person out of that position. Yeah, but now I don't have a lot of tolerance for it. Mm-hmm. When I pick up on it, it's just like, this is bullshit.
And a normal initial response is that, right? We see our kids do that all the time. I was just mentioning how one of mine is typically like the mediator, the peacekeeper. That is how she'll respond to all of those kinds of things, right? And I think we learn that in life because we have to do that in life to make our situations more comfortable. Yeah,
and it's because it's so prevalent, it's such a prevalent thing. And it almost feels, do you feel it's getting worse or better?
I think we're talking about it more, but we're also pathologizing it. So we're creating all of these diagnoses and, I was raised by a narcissistic parent and this and that. I'm sorry. Anybody in their 25 to 40s is going through a process in their life where all of that shit's like stirred up in the middle of everywhere. And they're also parenting at the same time as doing all of that. And I'm not sure many people other than Mother Teresa and Princess Di really nailed that.
Yeah.
And even then, did they, or did the people raising their kids nail it?
I think it might have been the people raising their kids nailed it.
So there's another piece where it's like we're trying to legitimize and validate our experiences of what we went through, but we also pathologize and villainize what was also a normal experience.
Yeah, yes.
Right?
I think, which is all a different topic, but I think that's something that we're seeing too much of right now.
Yeah.
Because everybody's so individualistic. Yeah. It's all about the me, and look what happened to me, and I'm the victim, and not realizing that the people who are raising you were going through the exact same shit or some version of it as well.
That's my best place in therapy. So there's somebody, the holistic psychologist that I follow on Instagram. And I remember when I first started following her, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. And then I was like, Jesus, you are so villainizing of everybody else. So she very much takes the... She takes the victim role, the child role of it. I get it because we have to validate the inner child when we do all of that work. But eventually you have to bring that fucking child forward into adulthood and go, hey, remember that person? Remember that person that couldn't show up the way you needed them to be? It was because they weren't capable and didn't have the tools and weren't in those places. It wasn't because you weren't lovable. And it also isn't because they were a villain. They were doing everything they could with what they had. And unfortunately, you were resourced with a parent who didn't have all those things.
Exactly.
And it's just, I really think when we can get away from the blaming and just the acknowledgement, like we absolutely have to recognize what the impacts of those things had on us, but we also have to see the other side of the fucking coin finally.
Yeah.
And I have so many clients that is beautiful to watch, like, oh my gosh, seeing their parent as another adult on their own journey changed everything in their own journey, right?
Yeah.
And I got to see that with my mom when I appreciated, as an adult woman and being a mother and watching her be a grandmother. And then when she took my workshop and was like, oh, wow, I didn't know about these things. I didn't know about self-abandonment. I didn't know about, like self-love. Like she didn't teach me that because she had no fucking clue how to fit that into her life back then.
Yeah.
Right? Then I got to see her as a human, just like I see in my office, going through her own stuff who didn't have the tools that we have now,
Big time.
In so many ways. So, those are pieces that I really encourage people to look at is like, yes, with a passive aggressive, maybe caregiver, you might have become more cynical in this and that, but just notice this is just the places that the little markers showed up on the game board.
Yep.
The game pieces showed up on the game board because of these things. You don't have to villainize anything.
No, and we like to do that.
We do.
Which is horrible, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, and that's part of that cynicism, right? And
it's
part of our wounds and our need to, validate our own experiences and stuff. But I also think the more we can back up away from that and just understand like, oh, right, when this and this happened, this occurs, right? Like nobody gets mad when water turns to ice. They're not like, oh my God, I couldn't believe you made it so hard.
Some people do.
I guess. Okay, you're right. They do.
Some
But
people do.
essentially, it's like, this is like 1 + 1 = 2. I'm sorry if that pisses you off.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it just is, right?
And I think as a society, that hopefully will be the next step that we take. Now that we're doing all this sort of processing and
Yeah.
acknowledging these things, that we can go to a place where we start seeing it that way, because then we'll have more harmony, I think, in
And
the world.
I find that people who stay in passive aggressive states are also committed to staying in a victimized mindset.
Yeah.
And I have certain approaches with those clients in my life or friends or things like that. And I remember being that person.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being that person. And it was when I was just very out of alignment and unhappy in my life. Right?
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the biggest thing was like, I knew I wasn't doing or where I was supposed to be. It didn't feel right, you know?
And then figure out a way to pull yourself out of that. Which sometimes you need the help of someone else, and it's nothing, and that's good.
Yeah. And what does that look like when we're kids? You know, like Jason and I were talking a little bit this morning just about funny dynamics. And it's like, what did you say your dad would have said about...
It's like, look, die quietly. Nobody wants to hear it.
Right. Yeah. It was like, I want to die. I don't want to be here. I hate you as a mom, or whatever the comments would be. Right. And yeah, it was like, that's what you would hear back then. And it's like, woo, that's a big shutdown. One of my big things with my kids is like, out of nowhere, they'll just be like, you know, half an hour after dinner, I'm starving. And I will say, like, I get so much stuff for them, so much.
Mm-hmm.
But I finally, like, often will say, this entire kitchen, you are welcome to go through all of the drawers, all of the fridge, all of the cupboards, and find something that will cure your hunger. Like, resource yourself. Don't yell at me that you're hungry. If you're hungry, do something about it.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're so resistant. Some of my kids will do it, no problem. They just needed permission because they have gotten in trouble for helping themselves to things prematurely or too close to dinner or whatever. So I get that they're double checking, but then there's also a piece of like, I'm hungry, do something about it. And that is a hard one. And man, they stay really committed to that. And it's never about the hunger. It's about, how do I get your attention to do what I need you to do?
Griffin had a long phase with
Yeah.
that now it's just, we just got to the point, it's like, can I have some strawberries? Well, go get your own strawberries. 'Cause I'm
Absolutely.
tired. Like, he actually once came downstairs
Yeah.
to me while I was watching TV. Dad, can you get me some strawberries? And I'm like, by the time you came down here, the amount of time you spent, you'd have opened the fridge, you could have taken the container out and started cutting yourself.
And these are pieces that are like annoyance for us at times, but then there are also teachable moments where, yes, our kids did have to ask for that all the time.
Yeah.
They always had to ask. And then it's like, how can I trust that I'm allowed to make my own decision and it will be okay? And I know when I've been reactive with my kids, it has prevented them from making their own decisions because they're worried they're going to get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
And now they verbalize it. Like my son even said, I'm scared. And it's not always me. He's referenced some other people in his life that have done that. And he says, like, I want to ask for this, but I'm scared what you're going to say, or I'm scared if it's the wrong time to ask.
Yeah.
And I really just like lean into that moment and like, I get it. There's been times where you've asked something and it's been the wrong time and you've gotten a really shitty response.
Yeah. And yelled at
So
and whatever.
Let's both sit right now and give it a try.
Yeah.
Let's see. But him communicating that to me was everything, because he could have not asked, which is then resenting, like not speaking up for his own needs. And then not also, that could have increased his cynicism because he wouldn't have had an opportunity to see a different response, right? So it's really cool to see that in working order. So people, if you think you're not really making a difference or you're not tackling these things, that's a perfect example of it. And I forget what the question was, but you know, if you think about it, like I have a busy house and everyone's asking something at any given time and I'm shooting out yes and no's without even thinking sometimes because it doesn't apply in the now.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't talk to me about next year's hockey jersey number when I'm making stir fry and fucking fixing someone's ponytail.
And you still haven't finished this year's hockey jersey number season,
oh my
right?
God. Like, fine, they're asking for your fees. I will pay them.
Yeah.
Because that's usually what happens. But yeah, no, perfect example. So I'm throwing out yeses and nos all the time, which really makes me appreciate any cynicism I had. And I remember some people always saying like, oh, I hated that. I would do all the chores and then my mom would never give me the reward or this and that. And instead of villainizing that person, I'm like, holy fuck, I can totally see that. I can see that because you forget. And I had Isabel remind me of something yesterday 4 different times. Oh, she ran out of lip gloss and I have a big supply downstairs of like extra Mary Kay stock. She asked me 4 times and finally she caught me after I had cleaned up the kitchen and she says, can we please go down and look at that lip gloss again? And I was like, thank you for reminding me. I forgot for a 4th time. You reminded me 4 times and I forgot every time. Yes, right now I'm free. Everything's cleaned up. Let's go.
Let's do it.
And she was so happy with that response. But I'm hoping in that moment, she remembered that telling me once doesn't always remind me. And it made me remember, this is why I have to remind them 4 times.
Exactly. Yeah. No,
it really is a beautiful reciprocal teaching.
it is. We can learn so much from our kids. And it's nice to be reminded of those things, right?
But it's hard.
But it's hard at the same time
It's
because
hard.
there's life that you got to deal with
Yes.
as well.
So that is where the passive aggressiveness comes in. That is where our cynicism comes in. Those two dance like crazy together, hey?
Big time.
And I guess the only thing that we can ask is when you take ownership and control of your life as the adult, you get to pick who's playing on your game board, which means the intentions of them are probably more aligned for your well-being. When you're younger, you don't get to pick, and the intentions might not be in your best interest.
Yes.
When you are an adult in charge of your own life, your own decisions, who comes in and out of it, we are increasing our trust that the right players are on the game board.
Yeah. And you have a responsibility, I think, to realize that behavior, maybe that you didn't appreciate, and make sure that it's not repeated to you, but you also don't repeat it on other people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reality is we are all going to our deathbed with like really amazing passive aggressive skills.
Yes.
Right? Like the fucker who decides I'm not dying. You guys can keep me alive for as long as you want.
Yeah.
Right? That is his form of being passive aggressive, right?
Yeah. Oh, big time.
Oh my gosh. The people who refuse to file their taxes if they have to pay them back. Like, oh, you watch, I got you.
I'll teach you all a lesson.
Oh my God. Someone's riding my ass going through the school zone and you're like, oh yeah, I'll just go 29 instead of 30, bitch.
How do you like that? Them
I did
apples.
that to a guy yesterday. He was going so fast behind me, and I was doing like 35 in the school zone. Sometimes I forget that it's there too, even my own kid's school. Finally, I just like tapped my brakes a couple times, and he got so mad.
Oh, they do? They do?
And I laughed. It made my day, guys. That was so passive aggressive, right?
But
because I could have just aggressively fingered him.
Yeah, but
Right? But I chose the passive
down.
option.
I do that too to people all the time. It's like I'm above the speed limit and you're riding my ass. Like fuck off.
Yeah, I think he completely forgot there was a school beside him.
Well,
he had to poop.
He had to poop. Oh yes, the pooper. That is a whole different story for a different episode.
Man. See, there was a bit of cynicism. I just kind of assumed this guy was a D-bag, but whatever.
Well, I'm not going to say anything.
I mean, he's thinking the same about me, right?
On that note, we bring this episode of the Into Greatness podcast to a close. Get ready for next week's, where we bring you your next favorite episode. Until then, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Stay passive-aggressively cynical.
No, let her out.
Let her rip. Let her rip, eh?